here? Okay. I want to welcome you to this public hearing, which is being held to solicit your comments on the final draft plan entitled Opportunities for Action. With me this evening, to my left, is Sandy LeBaron, who is with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. To my right, Bill Briley, who is Commissioner of the State of Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. In November 1990, Congress signed the Lake Champlain Designation Act, which created a 31-member bi-state Lake Champlain Management Conference, representing a diversity of interests around the lake. And it authorized this conference to develop a comprehensive plan for protecting the future of the lake and its watershed. A list of the Lake Champlain Management Conference members is found in the back of the plan, and there are a number of Lake Champlain Conference members here tonight. Also with us tonight are staff members of the conference that are certainly available to answer any questions you may have. We have been at work for the last 5 years developing this document, and during that process we have also embarked upon a number of demonstration projects that were set forth to provide some environmental gains during the planning process. We have an annual report that gives an overview of a number of those projects and the funding that has been made available to us. Also with this plan is a study that's an economic analysis of the final draft plan. This document is available at the front table if you wish to take a look at it. We have held a series of public meetings in 1990 and throughout the course of this project to solicit public comment. This is the last of a series of 4 public hearings to solicit public comment on this final draft document. One was held in Orwell, Vermont, one in Adirondack, New York, and last evening we were over in Burlington. The public comment period continues until September 16th. We are beginning to analyze the documents that have been coming into us. You are all strongly encouraged to provide any additional comments before September 16th to us for writing. At that time, we intend to issue a responsiveness summary, which will articulate the conference position on those comments that we received during this public review process. It is our hope to have a final plan completed by the end of October and begin the important work of implementing these recommendations. I would only add that we have offered this document and proceeded in the spirit of working cooperatively with the interests that surround the lake. This is not a document that's intended to present unfunded mandates to the communities or the public at large. It was done in the spirit of cooperation, and our hope and intent is to implement this plan in that same spirit. With that, I'd like to begin the formal process on the hearing. I would only add that this is a hearing, and its intent is to solicit your comment. For that reason, I will limit any discussion or debate. As I said earlier, there are a number of conference individuals here, including the staff, that are readily available to discuss with you on a one-on-one basis any aspects of this plan if you so choose. With that, I'd like to ask if there are any elected officials, either at the federal, state, or local level, who would like to provide comments first. Okay. Having seen that, I'd like to begin in the order of individuals who signed in. First speaker, Gary Douglas.
Benjamin Disraeli was probably won't surprise some. He was a great British imperialist and therefore a particular historical hero of mine. You can make the connections. Once said the only thing more boring than a mother talking about her own children is an author talking about his own book. In the sense that I've had truly the pleasure and privilege of being a part of authoring the final version of this plan that we're talking tonight, I hope I can avoid that warning about being boring. If you'll indulge me, I am going to take a little time here because it is important. It's something that the Chamber of Commerce, as I believe all of you know, has placed at the top of its agenda over the last couple of years to officially read into the record our position paper. You may recall that a little over a year ago at the hearings on the earlier draft, we had a 23-page position paper. You'll be happy to know I have a 4-page position paper this time, which the plan is shorter and so is our position paper. But I would ask for your indulgence while I read through it. It does represent the unanimous consensus of both our Government Affairs Committee, which has engaged and followed this process over the last 3 to 4 years, and the unanimous consensus of our Board of Directors. As the largest business organization in Northern New York, representing 1,200 employers across the full spectrum of business and industry in the region, the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce continues to play a unique role in bringing the voice, experience, needs, and commitment of business to the table wherever and whenever the future of the North Country is a topic. The preservation of Lake Champlain as one of our region's greatest natural and economic resources has been and remains a priority interest of this chamber and its members. Thus, we have devoted considerable time and effort over the past several years in helping to devise a future approach to the lake, which will be both balanced and effective. Our concern for the lake drove us to express a number of serious concerns over the contents of the earlier draft of the Lake Champlain Basin Plan. While wholly supporting the general goals and objectives, we were convinced that the first effort was too broad, too unfocused, too costly, and too impractical on many levels to achieve implementation. And because we sincerely desired a plan that could garner the necessary support to achieve implementation, we pledged to back up our expressed concerns with a commitment to help redraft and refine it, together with a broad coalition of interests who shared both our concerns and our commitment, including the Farm Bureau, other chambers, organized labor, the Industrial Council, the Adirondack Builders, the Marina Owners, the Campground Owners Association, a number of local government leaders, and others. We thank the Lake Champlain Management Conference and all concerned for opening the doors and welcoming us to the table in partnership with others to join in rolling up our sleeves and constructing a revised plan capable of capturing broad consensus and partnership for the future. As stated more than a year ago, there were several basic principles which needed to be reflected within and throughout the Lake Champlain Basin Plan in order to achieve support. 1, targeting of recommended actions on priorities, in turn creating a plan which would be much shorter and far more focused. 2nd, no unfunded mandates, recognizing that the already stressed localities, farmers, employers, and residents of the North Country are unable to bear the cost of new mandates on top of those already placed upon them. 3, no new regulations, placing emphasis instead on education, coordination, technical assistance, and voluntary action. 4th, no new regional regulatory structure or agency, assigning all final recommended actions to the many existing agencies, organizations, and entities which already exist. 5th, the achievement of balance, both in the relative burden of implementation between New York and Vermont, and with other vital interests such as employment, affordable housing, tourism development, industrial preservation and expansion, and competing infrastructure needs, among other issues. And finally, a direct role for key stakeholder interests in redrafting and then implementing the plan, including but not limited to business and industry, local government, economic developers, farmers and agribusiness, marinas and campground owners, labor, builders, realtors, and chambers of commerce. It is a great pleasure that the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce acknowledges and recognizes the inclusion of each of these principles in the revised chapters and recommendations of the current Basin Plan. All recommended actions are prioritized and targeted, resulting in a plan which is a fraction of the length of the earlier version, and which clearly identifies the 3 overall priorities for action, and within each chapter, those items which are highest priority, high priority, priority, and other items for consideration, providing meaningful guidance for implementing agencies and funding sources. There are not only no unfunded mandates recommended within the plan, there are explicit provisions tying implementation of key elements to full federal and/or state funding. There are no new regulations recommended, with emphasis throughout the plan placed instead on education, voluntary action, and local control. There is no new regional agency or regulatory structure proposed of any kind. There is appropriate balance between New York and Vermont, and a far greater balancing of the diverse interests and needs of the region. And there has been a fresh role for key stakeholder interests who initially expressed concern, and there is a commitment to institutionalize that role in the future. As we did with the earlier draft of the Basin Plan, this chamber has carefully and thoroughly reviewed and analyzed each chapter and recommendation of the redrafted version. We have examined each instance where a specific concern was raised in last year's 23-page position paper to determine if that concern had been resolved. And we are pleased to find that each item of our earlier position paper has been addressed in what we consider to be a satisfactory manner, whether through elimination or clarification. We have also measured each revised chapter and recommendation against the governing principles I have just outlined, and we are pleased to find a remarkable shift toward each one of these critical principles throughout the plan. Our position. Based upon the successful efforts of the Lake Champlain Management Conference over the past year, as reflected in the revised contents of the Basin Plan, the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce is pleased to express its support and endorsement. The Board of Directors of the Chamber encourages final adoption of the plan as now presented, and acceptance of the revised plan by Governor Pataki and the Environmental Protection Agency. In doing so, however, we emphasize the requirement of the strictest possible adherence to the principles we have enunciated and which the revised plan has incorporated. These principles cannot be divorced from the overall plan or any of its strategies and recommendations. They are the backbone of its effectiveness and viability and must become central to the thinking of all concerned as implementation of the plan's many recommendations proceeds in years ahead. Perhaps key among these is the commitment to maintain a continuous dialogue with all of the key stakeholder interests of the region and to maintain a direct place at the table for those interests as implementation becomes a broad-based partnership effort. This chamber is proud of the engaged, constructive role it has been able to play in this important process and is fully committed to the maintenance of that role as we now move forward in securing the continued quality of Lake Champlain. In addition to that 4-page statement, there are several other pages which I'm not going to read but have submitted in writing which do offer some further insight into our views on a chapter-by-chapter basis and specifically address some of the major concerns we raised a year ago and why it is and how it is we see that those have been addressed and those have been submitted. There also is a supply of our position paper, including those additional pages, on the table outside. We're happy for anyone to have those and invite you to review it and see what the analysis of the chamber was. I'd like to offer just a few other thoughts, if I can. Going back to another favorite British imperialist, you're going to see a strain here. Churchill said there are two kinds of success, initial and ultimate. I think what we have at this point is initial success. It isn't ultimate yet. It's the initial success of having captured an amazingly broad-based consensus around a plan that a year and a half ago I think many would have said would have been impossible to achieve given the place that the process was at and the reaction at that point. It is an incredible success story to that degree. Ultimate success will now rest on how the plan is implemented in years to come and the continued commitment to see that implementation through. We are committed, we believe our coalition partners are. Ultimate success, however, is not going to be defined by the measures that some might see as being the primary measures, be that the speed of implementation, or be that some group of numbers against some other group of numbers. Those are parts of measuring ultimate success. We would hold that ultimate success will truly be measured by the degree to which implementation follows and adheres to the principles that we have enunciated and restated here again tonight. To the degree the implementation varies from any of those principles, it is 100% predictable that progress, let alone success, will falter. So we need to keep in mind what comes first. It's the principles we have enunciated that come first. The concerns and suggestions of others at this stage really do come second because they are not achievable unless those principles are adhered to. Targeting and prioritization, no unfunded mandates, no new regulations, no new regional agencies or structures, maintenance of balance, and continuation of involvement of all key stakeholder interests. I thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments and for the opportunity to be a part of this process.
Thank you, Gary. Alan Booth.
I'm Alan Booth, a retired Plattsburgh insurance agent. I only decided to speak this afternoon after reading the report further, and especially the section protecting human health, page 26 to 28. I agree, of course, with everything it said, but I think a far stronger statement for action soon is necessary. There's a few examples. Septic systems. I think there should be definite requirements for new construction, and there also should be far more inspections where there is poisons in the lake and therefore occasions need to be attended to now. I think there should be something on boat cleanliness. I don't think it is mentioned. I don't think it's as important a problem as I remember. I have a lakeshore camp, as I remember years ago, but I think it's still a problem. And I think marina cleanliness is a problem. I know talking recently with one boat owner saying he left one marina and went to another because of the cleanliness situation. I think there should, frankly, be recommendations for severe fines. Perhaps there are, but there should be for watching out for cleanliness by boaters and marinas. It does mention in one section about improvements watching the water supply in those locations that are used for 6 months of the year or longer. I believe it should apply to all people. We certainly have responsibility to our tourists, and that would seem to me why it wasn't mentioned for those under 6 months. I do not know the cost of these things. I've taken a layman's approach, but I do know that a health epidemic would cost many dollars, and then there would be the human cost also. We have to balance these things. I do not find any mention of groundwater. Our principal subject is the lake, but groundwater is essential to the area. And the subject of reducing salt on highways, I think should be approached. I think it's an overall good report, but for a layman, I think a good idea would be to have an executive report of, say, 15 or 20 pages, more in less technical, so that most of us could understand, get an overall understanding better. This would help over the years to encourage people to keep this subject in mind. I know there's been improvement in the lake water cleanliness and purity in recent years, but frankly, it's not the clear, pure lake I remember as a boy swimming back in the 1920s. We just do not have the lake that we had then. We have to look at this from a long-term point of view and not just the 15 or 20-year improvement. We've got to go on to protect this lake for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Randy Beach.
Good evening. My name is Randy Beach, and I'm here representing the Adirondack Builders Association tonight. With a great deal of pleasure, to say the least. I was here a year ago, and certainly appear here tonight to give the Builders Association's Government Affairs reaction to the new revised plan. The Adirondack Builders Association, the ABA, is an organization formed in 1990. Members of the ABA include builders, developers, and suppliers. In addition, several real estate brokerages, insurance agencies, financial institutions, and utilities are members. The ABA endeavors to provide a forum for discussion and coordination among its members to further enhance development and economic progress within the North Country and Adirondack region. The ABA is firmly committed to conservation and protection of the environment and the natural splendor that the Lake Champlain Basin encompasses. To this end, the ABA supports efforts to produce an effective pollution prevention, control, and restoration plan for Lake Champlain. This is in the interest of each of the various members of the association, and more importantly, in the interests of the constituency that the members serve, the peoples whose homes are located within the Lake Champlain Basin. At the same time, the ABA is equally concerned with the economic well-being of the region. It is with a focus on these two concerns that the Adirondack Builders Association has reviewed the Lake Champlain Basin draft plan of June 1996, the revised plan. The ABA has identified several fundamental principles it feels are indispensable to the success of the Lake Champlain Basin Plan. As such, these principles must be included within and indeed throughout the revised plan. A successful plan must employ vision and prioritization. The ABA firmly believes that vision and prioritization is crucial to the success of the Lake Champlain Basin Plan. In the first version of the Lake Champlain Basin Plan, the draft plan, there was a clear lack of overall vision. The draft plan presented dozens of recommendations and proposals without apparent prioritization. Therefore, prioritization and vision are two elements that must be present throughout the revised plan if it is to win support and succeed. 2, a successful plan will not contain unfunded mandates. The ABA has firmly adopted the position that unfunded mandates are unacceptable. The draft plan was rife with such examples of irresponsibility and poor physical planning. To achieve support, the revised plan must contain fully funded mandates. The population of the Lake Champlain Basin cannot support further physical burdens. 3, a successful plan will lack additional burdensome regulations. The ABA stands fast in its commitment to reject a plan that results in the creation of a burdensome regulatory regime. The people of Lake Champlain Basin are currently overburdened with the strict and often redundant regulations set forth by such agencies as the Adirondack Park Agency, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Army Corps of Engineers. The draft plan, had it been implemented, would have placed an even greater regulatory burden upon the populace. Such a plan is unacceptable. 4, a successful plan will not establish a new regional regulatory agency. In addition to the need for a deliberate absence of new regulation, the ABA believes that a successful plan must avoid the establishment of a new regional regulatory agency. Again, the region is heavily regulated by agencies, such as the ones already mentioned. The ABA will not support a plan that calls for the creation of a new regional agency. 5, a successful plan will balance the implementation burdens between New York and Vermont while taking into account the economy of the regions. The ABA believes that the costs of implementation must be balanced between New York and Vermont. Further, a successful plan must consider the economic impact upon the region. The draft plan failed to achieve such a balance, while completely disregarding the regional economies. 6, a successful plan must encompass a direct role for key interested parties. Finally, the ABA believes that a plan must involve the key parties of the region, parties having a direct interest in the region, including business and industry leaders, local government, economic development agencies, farmers, labor interest builders, and realtors must be given a direct role in the development and implementation of the regional plan. The draft plan failed to incorporate public input and local representation. The revised plan. The ABA is pleased to recognize the revised plan, that it includes each of the above fundamental principles. The ABA has diligently reviewed the revised plan within the scope of the principles set forth above. Our review has revealed the following. Excuse me. The revised plan contains an overall vision and it is prioritized. Unlike the draft plan, the new version is focused. The revised plan identifies and explains its objectives and goals. The revised plan does not contain unfunded mandates. Instead, the new plan contains provisions for full federal or state funding. The revised plan has successfully avoided the creation of new burdensome regulations. Emphasis is placed instead upon education, voluntary action, and local control. And I'd like to repeat those: education, voluntary action, and local control. The revised plan does not call for the establishment of a new regional regulatory agency. A balance between New York and Vermont regarding the implementation cost has been achieved by the revised plan. Additionally, the new plan accounts for the economic diversity of the regions and the impact the plan will have on such economics. And the revised plan has given local parties having a profound interest in the development and implementation of such a plan a more direct role. There has been a further commitment to institutionalize such roles in the near future. Weighed against the draft plan, the revised plan evidences a noticeable shift toward the fundamental principles stated above. It is with great pleasure that the ABA acknowledges this shift in emphasis. The ABA is proud to support and endorse the revised plan. The contents and character of the revised plan reflect the efforts of the Lake Champlain Management Conference. The ABA encourages the final adoption of the revised plan and entreats Governor Pataki and the Environmental Protection Agency to accept the plan in its present form. It must be noted, though, that the ABA supports the revised plan with the understanding that the fundamental principles expressed within this position paper and the new plan will be strictly adhered to. These principles are vital to the success of the revised plan now and in the future. The ABA looks forward to continued dialogue and cooperation between all interested parties in the quest for the preservation and betterment of the Lake Champlain Basin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mike Peterson.
Members of the Lake Champlain Basin Program, Lake Champlain Management Conference, and other parties at the hearing. My name is Mike Peterson, and I'm a resident of Elizabethtown, New York. I appear as a representative of High Peaks Audubon Society, Incorporated, chapter of National Audubon Society, representing the Adirondack Champlain region of New York State. Founded in 1973, we engage in educational, scientific, and investigative pursuits and have appeared before a number of hearings in the past. We hold membership in the Federation of New York State Bird Clubs, Association of Field Ornithologists, Colonial Waterbird Society, and Adirondack Research Consortium, to name a few. Since 1982, High Peaks Audubon has managed the Four Brothers Islands, site of the largest and most varied waterbird colonies on the lake, and a vital stopover and staging point for migrants for the Nature Conservancy. For those 14 years, I've served as wildlife manager, directing 2 Audubon wardens and a host of volunteers in census banding and research activities on Four Brothers. Our officers and directors have carefully reviewed the opportunities for action evolving plan, and we commend the Basin Program and Management Conference for their lead in this vital initiative. We do, however, have serious concerns about some of the Living Natural Resources, Chapter 3, portion of the published plan. We also feel that several clear directives in Public Law 101-596 and the accompanying statement of legislative intent remain unfulfilled. We applaud the plans to review current fish and wildlife management plans and reports in terms of their consideration of the long-term sustainable yield of the fishery and wildlife resources, noting emphatically that sustainable yields may at times be exclusive of or even contradictory to the planned ecosystem approach to fish and wildlife resources. In examining management programs for fish such as salmonids and walleye, what is meant by, quote, other top aquatic predators, bald eagle and osprey, river otter and mink, great black-backed gull and other larids. However admirable, the activity remains too vague. If additional key species are to be incorporated into fisheries management, why are yellow perch, white perch, and cormorant singled out? Might not the impact of dreissenid mussels be the greatest of all, affecting even perch and avian predators? If, as our studies suggest, 15% of the diet of double-crested cormorant at Four Brothers is the invasive white perch, why are current control efforts being directed at cormorants? Obviously, an ecosystem approach and broad review of current management of fish and wildlife resources is needed. Another of the priority actions suggests that we, quote, build management strategies for native species that become nuisances, such as cormorants and beavers, into wildlife programs, close quote. This implies that cormorants are nuisances, a point that we might contest on the same ecological grounds that are supposed to enhance these priority actions. One might also ask if the beaver nuisance is as ecological as it is economic, social, and political. The number of beaver trappers in New York State has declined from 30,000 as recently as 1979 to just 6,000 last year, and may continue to drop as a result of Euro community regulations and the dictates of fashion in North America and elsewhere. The importance of beaver to wetlands restoration is obvious. At the previously dried up Webroy Swamp in Essex County, New York, for example, they yielded the first naturally nesting osprey in the Champlain Valley, along with habitat for great blue, green, black-crowned night herons, grebes, geese, ducks, and countless other wetland species. We're also concerned over the priority action to, quote, perform site-specific species or habitat enhancements such as nuisance wildlife control, close quote. Especially when the glossary defines nuisance species, species causing annoyance or having adverse ecological impacts. What, we ask, is meant by annoyance? There are many species that are annoying, from no-see-ums to swimmer's itch. Similarly, the glossary defines non-native. In this plan, not originating naturally in the Lake Champlain Basin. This is the first time we've seen such a parochial definition of this term. The generally accepted definition of native, which is not in the glossary, is native to North America, and non-native as all other species introduced from Eurasia or elsewhere. Yet even these definitions are sometimes difficult to decide. Cattle egrets, which nest on Four Brothers, apparently crossed the Atlantic from Africa on their own and moved north to colonize the US and Canada. Are they native or non-native? Most of the colonial water birds of Lake Champlain were apparently extirpated from the basin before we began to gather ornithological data in the late 19th century, but hung on in the St. Lawrence Valley and other nearby refugia, and then returned to Champlain as human persecution was outlawed. Our black-crowned night herons, which began nesting in the mid-20th century on islands in the lake, but for which we have no historic records, non-native. Clearly, house sparrows and ring-necked pheasants are non-native, but the glossary suggests house finches and wild turkeys would be as well. We find these definitions of nuisance and non-native are confused and confusing. While the plan to seek consensus on endangered and threatened species listing criteria for lake-related species is a worthy one, we would note that on the New York side of the lake, the DEC has been working since 1992 on a major revision of the New York State list of endangered, threatened, and special concern species, and has just reopened the process to additional public comment. Until updated lists for New York, Vermont, and Quebec are promulgated and approved, any efforts will be based upon dated listings and only have to be redone as newer lists become available. We call your attention to Section 304 of Public Law 101-596 of November 16, 1990, C1. The Secretary of the Interior, acting through the United States Fish and Wildlife Service in cooperation with the Lake Champlain Fish and Wildlife Management Cooperative and the Management Conference established pursuant to this subsection, shall, we go down to B, conduct a wildlife species and habitat assessment survey in the Lake Champlain Basin, including, and we go down to small Roman numeral 2, a survey of wildlife habitats such as islands, wetlands, and riparian areas, and lowercase Roman 3, a survey of migratory bird populations breeding, migrating, and wintering within the Lake Champlain Basin. To the best of our knowledge, such surveys of islands and migratory birds have never been carried out. High Peaks Audubon has a wealth of proprietary and cooperative data on such things as the flora of the Four Brothers, hawk watches, Christmas bird counts, bird banding, colonial water bird censuses, and other surveys which remain largely untapped. We ask that the island and migratory bird surveys be carried out thoroughly and be made available as required by federal law. We lastly call your attention to the statement of legislative intent that accompanies the Lake Champlain Special Designation Act signed by U.S. Senators D'Amato, Jeffords, Leahy, and Moynihan, which states in part, in order to improve and maintain the health of wildlife and fishery resources within the basin, the Fish and Wildlife Service should expand its efforts there. Special attention should be given to threatened and endangered species and their habitats, and to migratory species. We urge that migratory species, largely birds, but also certain butterflies and other fauna, receive this special attention, as instructed by the senators in their statement of intent. High Peaks Audubon again commends the Basin Program and Management Conference for their leadership in the Opportunities for Action plan. We urge those responsible for carrying out the mandates of the Lake Champlain Special Designation Act of 1990 to step forward and move confidently toward a true ecosystem approach to management. We realize that the interactions between zebra mussels, moon-eyed, scaup, zooplankton, and white perch are exceedingly complex, but we stand ready to assist with our experience in reaching a better understanding of the rich web of life that's Lake Champlain. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, Rich.
My name is Mark Gretsch. I live in Elizabethtown, Essex County, and I'm here tonight as a representative of the High Peaks Audubon Society as Mike Peterson. For the past 20 years, I've lived and worked in the North Country, and for the same period of time, I have been involved in environmental-related activities. Most recently, I have been working for the New York Natural Heritage Program, conducting inventories of wildlife in the Champlain Valley, so I can speak with some experience and authority on some of the issues discussed in this document. I'm glad to see that you have labeled this document as an evolving plan for the future of the Lake Champlain Basin, and have asked for public comment and suggestions to improve this comprehensive plan. As background, I'd like to read some statements made in this document and later point out some of its contradictions. On page 31, there is a statement that reads in part, "The role of many species in the lake's ecosystem is poorly understood." And on page 33, it is admitted that fish and wildlife management decisions affecting the Lake Champlain Basin are often made on the basis of limited data, the emphasis being on limited data. In the introduction to Chapter 3, it is stated that, in quote, "The living natural resources of Lake Champlain Basin are part of a very complex ecosystem." Not just a complex ecosystem, but admittedly a very complex ecosystem. I'd now like to direct your attention to the priority action recommended on page 32, which says refine, by which I assume you mean improve current management of Lake Champlain's fish and wildlife resources to enhance the application of an ecosystem approach. Sounds very scientific until you read further. There are recommendations to build management strategies for native species that become nuisances. And in parentheses, the species cormorants and beavers are listed. This is one place I believe the document is flawed. We have a problem with the definition of a nuisance species that does not have a strictly scientific or factual definition, but whose interpretation is based more on emotion and hysteria and opinion than in fact. Let's see how nuisance is defined in the glossary of this document, and I think it was mentioned by the previous speaker, but I'll just repeat it here. Having adverse ecological impact, that part seems fine, but it is followed by species causing annoyance. Well, that definition is so broad as to be useless. All of us here tonight could be included in that definition, it seems to me. We have all been annoyance to someone, sometime, someplace. My suggestion is to eliminate species causing annoyance from the definition. Cormorants are one of those species whose role in the lake's ecosystem is poorly understood. So rather than rushing to judgment and recommending that this species be managed, I think the reasonable decision at this time is to suspend judgment until more research is done. There are so many other proven nuisance species, such as water chestnut, zebra mussel, water milfoil, among others, that it seems logical that these species should have the highest priority for action. Any reference to cormorants as a nuisance species is not only premature, but also unfounded at this time, and therefore any reference to managing its population should be eliminated from this document. In other words, I am asking you to take your own advice and not make decisions based on limited data. Let's look at some of the legitimate research that has been done recently on the food preferences of the cormorant right here on Lake Champlain. These studies address the concern that cormorants may be eating game fish. These studies should calm the fears of fishermen. Studies show that cormorants were eating mostly white perch and yellow perch. Only 2.1% of the fish cormorants were feeding on include bass, pike, and salmon. It is also known that white perch eat the eggs of walleye pike, so in this respect, cormorants in fact may be having a beneficial effect on some game fish. This is not the only study that has arrived at the same conclusion. In the species account for the cormorants in the book Birds of America, edited in 1917 by T. Gilbert Peterson, it says, "Market fishermen everywhere complain of the inroads these birds make on the food fisheries of the sea. But a recent investigation carried out by the Canadian government proved beyond doubt that the destruction wrought by cormorants in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which isn't really too far from here, has been overrated greatly. I could cite many more such studies with the same findings. I am suggesting to you that managing the populations of cormorants and gulls on Lake Champlain would be like turning the clock back to the bad old days. There's a certain amount of justification here to invoke the truism that those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. A little bit of historical perspective. To manage cormorants and gulls, it would be necessary to reverse the intent of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that protected migratory birds. I'd like to invoke the names of John Bird Burnham and T. Gilbert Peterson here as a defense. These are two men who in the beginning of this century fought hard to protect migratory birds. John Bird Burnham, in fact, can rightfully be called the father of this legislation. I'm sure if he were here today, and he wouldn't have to come very far since he had a summer camp on Lake Champlain in Essex, he would be vigorously advocating adherence to this treaty. T. Gilbert Peterson, likewise, was a summer resident on Lake Champlain, and as president of the then fledgling Audubon Society, was a strong advocate of bird protection. It seems strange that the government agency, the Department of Agriculture, that was chosen to write the regulations necessary for enforcing the original 1912 Weeks McLean Bill, is now in the business of asking for a waiver to reverse this policy regarding the management of cormorants on Lake Champlain. So in 75 years we have come full circle. This time, however, I think we have 75 years of wisdom on our side. There's also a significant portion of this document devoted to a discussion of protecting and restoring wetlands. Very briefly, I would remind you that the greatest creator of wetlands is the beaver. In the Adirondacks, perhaps 3/4 of the habitat for waterfowl has been created by the beaver. This type of evidence is hard to ignore. So if you are interested particularly in non-regulatory ways of improving wetlands, the beaver, contrary to public opinion perhaps, will be your strongest ally. We concur with this document that much more needs to be done to inventory the natural resources of the region. This is the database from which decisions will be made, and we all know that one's decisions are no better than the rigor of one's scientific approach. A balanced approach to implementing this plan should include local Audubon chapters like our High Peaks Audubon Society of Northern New York State. We would like to become one of the key players actively involved in implementing this plan once it has been modified so that all its priority actions are based on sound scientific principles. Thank you.
Thank you. George Clifford?
Yes, I'd like to speak in place of the very brief.
Okay.
I hear you, sir, so you have
We have a
to speak
report.
up.
I think you would feel free to stay there as long as you
Yeah, once I can hear you.
All right, you'll hear me.
Okay.
I came here 25 years ago with the Air Force in the small deserts. So as a returning port, a four-season area. I raised a question in April of 1995 at this hall about flooding. I'm not taking any exception to what is in the plan. And I want to make sure that you understand that I have been involved in this lake and its problems, such as taking samplers of wood chips to the Lake Champlain committee dinners and being a lay monitor for a number of years for the Cumberland Bay. But my inquiry in April had to do with flooding. There was a page and a half out of 250 pages in the original draft statement about flooding. And of course, there's none currently. But subsequent to that inquiry, I provided to the Basin Committee on several occasions a copy of a trend analysis from DEC, which shows a 50-year trend of this lake having risen both max, mean, and minimum by over a foot. If that's happening and we're going up 1/4 of an inch a year, why isn't somebody studying it? And more particularly, and more disappointing, why in over a year that I've been furnishing this document, is there no response to it? It's a DEC study that I just happened onto, and they maintain these figures. But I think that all of you would agree that while flooding and fire cause the greatest dislocation to people in our society, fire affects very few. Flooding is devastating, and I think the study should have incorporated this trend. And I don't want to be sidetracked into the business of the International Joint Commission and that we can't control. I'm not talking about that. The people have a right to a study that gives early warning. We don't have it now, and I've been involved as a volunteer for a number of years in this community since I retired. And I think it's essential that we provide for this lake a system and forecast for the people that live on this island. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Barry?
Thank you. My name is Mark Beer. I'm a member of the Lake Champlain Basin Program Management Conference and a member of the Plattsburgh and North Country Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee. After surveying the crowd and listening to Mr. Douglas, I too am forced to call on the words of Winston Churchill, who, when complimented on the size of the large crowd that had gathered to hear him speak, pointed out that while he was certainly pleased, he was not impressed, given the fact that were he that night not to deliver the speech, but instead be hung by the neck until dead, the crowd would probably be 3 times as large. I noticed tonight that the crowd is rather small, so I conclude that there'll be no hanging, and that's probably good for both sides of the party. For more than 16 years, I have served as a consultant to Canadian companies who wish to do business in the United States and to several dozen nonprofit economic development agencies as a consultant in economic development and economic development marketing. In addition to my background in economic development, I'm a graduate of the American Economic Development Council's Basic Economic Development course. the United States Housing and Urban Development Program on Economic Development Certification, and I'm also certified in Economic Impact Analysis, again by the AEDC. I offer these credentials in the hope that you will consider seriously my continuing concerns with that portion of the Lake Champlain Basin Conference Management Plan, which is the Economic Impact Analysis. Let me first recognize and thank my fellow conference members in general, and Ron Manfredoni in particular, for their long-standing effort to produce a quality plan. I have been both the beneficiary and the victim of their wisdom and foresight, and I believe that all conference members contributed substantially to this particular plan, and in a very positive way. In addition, I would echo and agree with the statement delivered earlier this evening by Chamber of Commerce Executive Director Gary Douglas. Having said that, however, I must express both my disappointment and disfavor with the economic impact analysis of the Basin Plan. While it is true that few initiatives conducted in the past have received as much analysis of their economic impact as has this plan, it is also true that no series of proposals deserved a greater amount of time and effort and resources than did this plan to accurately gauge its full economic impact. As it stands, the economic impact analysis which accompanied this plan is at best incomplete and at worst misleading. I refer specifically to the hedonistic studies referenced in the economic impact analysis, to the astounding lack of data on the indirect cost of phosphorus removal, and also the pitifully inadequate level of funding devoted to the economic impact analysis, a funding amount which represents less than 2% of the total investment committed to this initiative. Nevertheless, I join with the Chamber in celebrating the accomplishments this plan represents, namely a balanced approach to both our economic and environmental health and well-being. I support this plan and encourage its swift enactment, with special attention given to the establishment of an ongoing entity to ensure that what we have laid out for our future will soon become reality. When the legislation was first introduced to create this program in Washington, I publicly expressed my concern to the New York State Citizens Advisory Committee, saying at that time that the Basin Program Initiative had all the potential of becoming a floating version of the APA, with apologies today, of course, to my reforming friends at the APA. Today, however, I say to you without reservation that what we have built and will soon launch is now a shining example to all who profess to protect our environment, but to the APA in particular, that environmental protection and economic development can indeed go forward hand in hand. And now, instead of this plan becoming an evil twin to the APA of old, it is instead a truly useful role model for our friends at the APA and others to both emulate and someday duplicate. Let us hope that what we have begun this evening will become the cornerstone of a new effort to work together on this project and others, both now and in the future. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce again. I am the president. I would like to restate the words of Mr. Douglas and are applauding the Lake Champlain Basin plan in its entirety and the management conference for its activities that have been accomplished. A few things I'd like to point out here. Section 7 regarding managing recreation. The Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce applauds the absence of any regulatory actions among the recommendations of this chapter, including the complete elimination of previous reference to potential user fees and taxes. The emphasis on developing enhanced access to the lake as opportunities arise is a welcome one, and particularly the recognition of the past and potential future role of private enterprise in achieving and enhancing various forms of recreational access. I'd also like to point out building local and level implementation. The Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce is pleased at the strong emphasis on locally based organizations and community-directed activities represented by recommendations in this chapter, together with recommended steps to enhance coordination, information information sharing, and technical assistance programs. This wholly non-regulatory, locally based approach has fully replaced all previous references to regional structures and land use planning, as requested by the public, and we are therefore pleased to endorse the recommendations of this chapter as they now are presented. I'd also like to publicly thank a few members of our board of directors at the Chamber of Commerce for their efforts and overview of this process for us. Mark Berry, who's been involved since the beginning, and at times our board of directors thought was boring us with all of his reports. I'd also like to thank Bruce Stedman, who served on the management conference, and Mr. Gary Douglas, who did a lot of work for us too at the management conference, and bringing all of our thoughts and concerns to the table. And it's with great pleasure that we do endorse the program as it now reads. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Peter Gilroy?
Pardon that. I'll be extremely brief. A year ago when I made a few remarks, they were directed basically at the opportunity to include everybody in, that the people who live in the valley, who live along Lake Champlain, who live on Lake Champlain, are probably the most interested people in what happens to Lake Champlain, what it is to become. And that in the new plan, the one that's been endorsed by the Chamber, and in the position statement, it says, perhaps key among these, talking about the position and the points made, is the commitment to maintain a continuous dialogue with all of the key stakeholders in the region, and to maintain a direct place at the table for those interests as implementation becomes broad-based and a partnership effort. And I really do applaud the Basin Program and the Management Conference for finding a place at the table for all of us who care about Lake Champlain. Thanks.
Thank you. No one else has signed formally requesting an opportunity to speak. Is there, in fact, anyone in the audience who would like to have this opportunity to provide comments? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
My name is Joe Giroux, and I'm on the Lake Champlain Management Conference also. I am one of the 2 farmers that were appointed to the Lake Champlain Conference. And through the process, I've maybe not made very many friends there because I pushed along with some of my thoughts were, but I think as a farming community that it was very important that 2 farmers be on there, because we're a very misunderstood community among ourselves, and a community that keeps growing smaller and smaller every year. And that I think that by looking at the economic study, and Mark Berry referred to that very displeases me to no end, because we keep looking back to the 70s for some data because we didn't have enough money to do the proper study in the first place. And 1970 and today are 2 totally different stories. The way it's being done and maybe some of the ways farmers do things today are completely different. And I keep pounding on this, and I'm going to keep repeating it, that I think the farmers for the non-point source are still taking a little more heat than they ought to be. I think it ought to be an urban, suburban type thing. It ought to not just be the farming. We ought to talk about septic tanks, and Mr. Booth talked about that, I think, a little earlier. We ought to talk about our shopping malls and so forth that contribute to all this, and not just the farm community, because if the farm community wasn't there to absorb some of this, it'd be a much worse problem than it is today with all the open space that's being out there, whether it's a trailer court that surrounds our farms, whether it's a bunch of homes, and I live right outside the city here, so I know all about this. And I think we're part of the mix here, and we ought to be looked at as a good mix, not as a bad mix. And also, as we move on into this conference to the next phase, I am very worried about one part, and I have spoke to different people, and I always want to go on record with that
that those of us who remain down there, whether it be me or anybody else, especially the Ag Advisory Council, that not only government agencies be seated there. If the meeting is made up of government agencies, it ought to not be a quorum, it ought to be equal with both sides. Because there's nobody that's going to understand this non-point business better than the people that have to live with the regulations after they're put in place. Thank you, sir.
Anyone else?
If anybody's interested in the trends of the lake, I have a few copies that I'd be glad to share.
Make sure, Aaron, you raise your hand. That he gets covered. Okay, with that, I'd like to bring to closure the formal aspects of this public hearing. I want to thank all of you for your participation tonight, and I appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate in tonight's activity. I want to repeat that the public comment period will remain open until September 16th. I certainly want to again encourage all of you to take the opportunity to provide written comments, and that we will have a responsiveness summary that will be published hopefully in October that responds to the variety of comments that we've got. With that, I again want to thank you, and this hearing is closed. Thanks. I'd only add again that staff will be here for a while if anyone has any questions, points of clarification.
This is Calvin Castine. I'm standing behind Northeastern Clinton Central School, and school is not in session today despite the number of cars you see. It's Saturday, September 7th, 1996, and the majority of these vehicles are here for the purpose of a fundraiser. And we have a Channel 5 vehicle here, and we're not even in Vermont. There's a youth soccer game going on, so some of the people are here for that. But there's a fun run today, a benefit fun run for the April Valley Fund. Okay, these are not the people who are putting on this particular event, but there's a couple of people who know about the fundraiser, and we're going to move over here and look at the school while we're talking to these people. Your names?
Madeline Rabideau.
Tyrone Rabideau. And I think, Maddie, we've already talked to you on Channel 21. We did a story on with April Valley's mom, and
Right.
the people who didn't see that or have been living in a vacuum for the last week or so.
Right.
Tell us about the April Valley Fund.
Well, it's coming good. We're really, really pleased and overwhelmed, really, with the response. We've had people with children who have CF who've been donating money, and we have now 4 guaranteed tickets. 2 of them have been donated frequent flyer miles, and 2 of them, one was a US Air donated ticket for April herself, and the other one was a friend who donated the price of a ticket for one of the family members. So we're really doing good. We'd like to get 2 more tickets for her little sister and uncle to come down later on after April has her surgery.
Okay, the 4 tickets so far then are going to be used for April, her mom, and who?
Her dad and her brother Denny, her 14-year-old brother Denny.
Okay, now I know medical insurance will be picking up probably most of the cost of the operation. Tell us again why the fundraiser is important.
Well, it's going to cost anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 to live down there. They're going to have to relocate and be there about 6 or 7 months, and we hope no longer. That means rent, food, electricity, all the same expenses they would incur at home, they're going to have down there. But because they have homes up here they have to maintain, there's no money for living down there. There's no fund, there's no special thing that we can go to for this money. We have to raise it. So we're trying